Welcome to Lipstick and Legacy, a podcast where your story matters and your journey has purpose. Together, we lift and inspire our communities one story at a time. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you for having me. This is so fun.
I know. I'm so glad you're here. So today I have Erin Phillips, and she is the co-founder and CEO of Power2Parent, one of Nevada's leading parent advocacy organizations. Since 2014, she has worked to empower families, expand educational opportunities, and encourage civic engagement. So there's a lot of things here on your list. So Erin, I have been following you probably since you started.
Yeah.
I was a first-year teacher in about 2013, and that's when I noticed you come on the map. So tell me a little bit, before we get started on Power2Parent, where you're from, kind of what you were like as a kid, like who's Erin Phillips?
Oh yeah, wow, that's a big question. So, I actually was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm not originally from Las Vegas. My family moved around a lot when I was a kid. I lived there for about 2 years in Albuquerque, and then we moved to Texarkana, Texas, and then moved again to Cheyenne, Wyoming, and then to Las Vegas. So my dad's job just moved him quite a bit. And so we ended up in Las Vegas, and I did the rest of my schooling here. And so it was probably, I think I was like 9 or almost 10 years old when we moved here. So I was still pretty young. I still feel like I'm a native.
And here is Las Vegas.
Yes, in Las Vegas. Yeah. And so we ended up at a church when I was in high school, and that's where I ended up meeting my first like real boyfriend. And we dated for a year and then broke up. And then after high school, we went to UNR up north in Reno for college. And about 4 years in, almost my last year of college, my boyfriend from high school and I ended up dating again. And then we ended up getting married after college. So that was my high school sweetheart became my husband, which is
that's adorable.
So fun.
So tell me a little bit about your family growing up. Were you conservative? Were they politically involved? Were they in church? Like what kind of family were you raised in?
So we were definitely raised in church. So we always, no matter wherever we moved, we would find a church right away and plug in. My parents would get involved and serve, and that was a big part of our family culture. My parents, I don't remember talking about politics that much. I was born in 1980, so I remember my parents watched the news. I remember actually my dad would listen to KNPR, so he'd listen to the radio, and so that was the only news back then really on the radio was NPR. So we'd listen to Christian radio or NPR, and so I heard a lot of news. And I was always really interested in the news. I remember like Reagan. I mean, I was little, but I remember stories about Reagan, like when Reagan got shot. I have memories of it. So it's possible it's like, I saw the news story later in life and then kind of feel like I remember it, but I definitely have memories of things from the news like that. And so I was always more interested. I remember this really distinctly. We would go on road trips because we weren't like wealthy. I don't even think I went on an airplane until maybe high school, but we would do a ton of road trips as a family. I have 2 younger brothers. So the 5 of us would do all these road trips, and I would stay up and my mom would want to fall asleep while my dad was driving. And my dad would want to like drive through the night to get where we were going. And so I would end up sitting in the front seat. My mom would sleep in the back, and I would stay up with my dad, and we would listen to the news, and AM radio was on all the time on those trips. So I just remember like Rush Limbaugh being on and some different conservative type of commentators like that. But again, we weren't really talking about politics. I don't remember having those like really deep discussions about any of those things at the time. And so, but my family definitely was good church going family. And I remember I wasn't even allowed to listen to secular radio. And I laugh about this now, but I remember the first time I heard a secular radio song, which was the Beach Boys. I went to Girl Scout camp.
Oh.
And so Girl Scout camp, they put on a radio.
Scandalous.
Yeah, and I don't, my mom wasn't there, and I was like, what is this music?
It's wonderful, right?
Yeah. I love the Beach Boys. So that was sort of the gist of my family growing up.
So a lot of people have an idea of what Las Vegas is like, especially when they're not from Las Vegas. I went to college in Utah, and I always had those questions like, you live in Las Vegas? And I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous, but even as an adult, I've had those questions. Was it like for you being raised in Las Vegas for part of your life. And what did the community look like for you?
Yeah. So when I moved here, I think I said I was like 9 or 10 years old. I think it was in third grade. So I was still in elementary school. I remember very distinctly, we moved over by Chaparral High School. So if anybody is familiar with that
East
area.
side.
Yeah, it was more on the east side, and it wasn't a great area at the time. And I don't know if my parents just didn't really know Vegas, so we just moved where my parents found a house, I think, at the time. But I mean, I remember going to the skating rink on Boulder Highway. And so that was kind of my hood over there. And we walked to school, we'd walk through the Chaparral parking lot to George Harris Elementary School. So, I just remember, I was a kid, and I remember we moved from Cheyenne. So it was like scorching heat when we moved here. It was probably 55 degrees when we left Cheyenne, Wyoming in the middle of summer. And we came here, and, obviously Cheyenne's a much smaller town. There's rodeo and all these different, definitely a different culture. So it was culture shock, I think, in some ways. My neighborhood was definitely different in Cheyenne, much more small. There's just no big city really aspect there. So yeah, that part was a culture shock for me, but I loved it. I mean, I made friends, and I felt like, I played sports. I grew up playing soccer, and so got really involved playing soccer. And then, we moved over towards kind of like Angel Park by the time I was going into middle school. And so I remember, kind of like that area of town was really being built. So there was nothing past, really, I'm trying to think maybe Durango or something like that.
Barely.
Like nothing past that. Yeah. So yeah, Angel Park was kind of the edge of the city at that point. So it's kind of cool for me, like from like the 90s, being able to see Vegas grow so rapidly. And that was the big story back then, is that just the growth was, I think we were growing the fastest in the country at one point in time.
And I think people don't realize there is a community, and there are people. I've been here 4 generations, so my kids would be 5th.
Yeah.
And like my mother was raised at the corner of 5th and Fremont, and her parents ran a swimming pool. Yeah. And my grandfather helped house and feed the men during the building of the Hoover Dam. And so there's a lot of history here. It really is the Wild West. It is for sure.
Well, I remember going to camp, like in high school, we'd go to church camp, and the kids that would come from like Texas and New Mexico and Arizona, they'd be like, "You guys live in Las Vegas? Like you guys live in hotels?" And they couldn't wrap their mind around the fact that there was an actual city, and that we had very little to do with, we'd rarely ever go to the Strip.
Yes.
And it was hardly a part of our life at all.
One thing I've noticed about Vegas as an adult is that there's so many people moving here, often from California and back east and whatnot, and everybody's looking for community. And so there's a lot of groups out there. What do you think is the best way to find a community in a city that's very new for many people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, my personal experience has been just finding a good church home.
I agree.
Honestly, I remember when I very first had my very first son, and I had a job, and I decided that, I was going to quit my job. I was going to stay home. And that was a huge decision, because it wasn't something that I really wanted to do ever. Prior to seeing his like little cute face when he came out, I was like, wait a second, like I can't leave you, but I really felt like my church community, I mean, if I hadn't had that, because I really went through like some kind of like identity crisis, when you're a new mom, you're learning everything new, everything's new anyways. You don't know if you're doing it right or not. But I had this community of moms that came around me, and a group called MOPS actually, that was huge. And I ended up, being a part of that group, being on leadership team for that group, and then leading it for a few years after that. So when my kids were little, I wasn't working a traditional job, but I was, I had responsibilities. I had a community of moms around me, and I really had a purpose. And I felt like it was developing a lot of leadership skills that I was going to need down the road. Obviously, when Power2Parent came along, I was in that space, learning and growing in that way. So a church to me, a mom's group, especially for moms, a lot of those moms groups are at churches, because there's a different level of like there's a community aspect of it, but it's just it's a deeper purpose than just the community. I think you find quality people who are, kind of really looking for the same thing.
And like-minded.
Yeah.
I find on Facebook and social media, I have I'm in a lot of mom groups, and it's interesting how everybody is searching for connection and community. Yeah. And I just want to scream at the top of my lungs, just go to church. If your kid needs friends, you'll find it there. If you need a meal because you just had surgery, you will find it. Just go to church. You don't even have to believe what they're teaching. Just go to church. Bring your kids to church. So I completely agree. The best way to find community in a new place or an old place is to get out, get your kids to church. And you'll find that community.
Absolutely.
All right. Tell me a little bit about what Power2Parent is, how it started. What does that look like?
So as I mentioned, I was a stay-at-home mom. I was getting more involved. My oldest was about in third grade. And so I had been told by a friend, actually ran into a friend at a basketball game with our boys were playing sports together. And she was like, do you know what's going on with the sex education in schools right now with Clark County School District? I was like, no, I haven't heard any of this. My oldest is only in third grade, So she was telling me that there had been some kind of movement by some outside organizations to make some changes to the sex education curriculum. And at the time, I didn't know what that meant. I did grow up here for the most part, so I did take sex education in fifth grade, and then I had it again in high school. Ninth grade, I believe, is when it came again in health. Beyond that, I didn't know much about what was going on in the district.
And it was pretty basic. I mean, it was the maturation program, basically. Separate the boys and girls in fifth grade. You get your packet that had some hygiene items and things, and they just told you the mechanics, basically.
Exactly. And it was, everyone was embarrassed, and it was silly.
And
yes. But you got some decent information. And you moved on, right? So I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I just remember her mentioning that. And then about a year, maybe not quite a year later, she had called me back and said, hey, listen, there's a bill. And this was about 2013. So that's the year you said already. That was correct. And so I was like, wow, I wonder what's going on with this. So I ended up starting to get involved with my trustee. So every there's a district, this Clark County School District is broken up into like A, B, C, D, E, F, I think.
And our district, it is humongous.
And all of them are, unfortunately, because Clark County as a whole is the fifth largest school district in the country. And so, we have these very, very large areas that represent, lots of different kids. And so unfortunately, that's not really, I think that's part of the problem, right? It would be better to have smaller broken up district, but that's a whole nother conversation. But that being said, I started getting involved with my trustee district meetings because that trustee would have meetings with just our district. And my sister-in-law, Angie, who had been a former teacher, knew more about it, and she had already been going and had been involved. So I actually just started going with her because we lived in the same district. And so through that process, I learned a lot, but I also found out about there was a meeting that we got an email for because we had been going to these trustee meetings that was an invite only meeting, and it was in regards to sex education. It came from our trustee at the time, who was Carolyn Edwards. And so I was like, that's interesting. These things were sort of connecting. So I was like, well, I better go to that meeting because I'm curious about what is happening and what they are wanting to teach. And so I ended up RSVPing using my sister-in-law's RSVP because I didn't actually get the invitation. She did. So I used hers and I RSVP'd. She was supposed to go with me, and I ended up showing up, and she ended up not being able to go. So I was sitting in the parking lot. I remember sitting in the parking lot. It was at Spring Valley High School, this meeting. And then my phone was almost dead. And I was like, Angie's not going to be here. I don't really want to go to this meeting. My phone's going to die. And I had this overwhelming, just almost like there was something attached to me.
Gave me chills.
Yeah. That was pulling me out of my car into this meeting. Like I literally just felt like audibly, like you have to go in. So I did. I went in, and it was really strange. The room was really strange. I didn't really recognize anybody. There was a lot of like administrators, school district officials, and as people were kind of like starting to introduce themselves, there was like special ed teachers and school counselors. And one girl recognized me. She's like, oh, hey, I remember you from middle school, which was really interesting. I was like, oh, do you have a kid in the district? She's like, no. I said, oh, why are you here? And she's like, oh, I'm an attorney with the ACLU. I was like, that's interesting. So there was just these little red flags kind of as I was in this meeting. And then they close the doors and start the meeting. And the guy comes up to the front, and he's like, oh, I'm from an organization called SIECUS. I'm here from New York. SIECUS stands for Sexuality Information Education Council of the United States. That's the name of this organization. And he's like, and we have this guide. It's called Comprehensive Sexuality Education K through 12 Guide. And we all got a copy of it. He passed it out to us. And you open the guide and I'm going through it. And it's like, they called it a menu of options. And I think that's probably a good way to describe this guide. And it would essentially break up what they felt like kids should be learning about sex education into categories. So one of the categories, just to give you an example, was like sexual fantasy. That's a category. And so I don't remember all the categories off the top of my head, but there was like 6 or 7 of them. And then it would break down each topic into what they felt like was appropriate per grade level. And I remember this one, part of the guide, it talked about masturbation, and it was in the kindergarten through 3rd grade section where they wanted to introduce and talk to these kids about what that meant and kind of what that was. And the big thing was and I was recognizing at the time and have learned since, is the real value with these groups is consent. And so they'll talk about consent as being really big, but and having no, they don't want any moral stigmatization on sexuality. And they'll say things like, children are sexual beings from birth. So this is the language that it was coming out of these conversations as I was hearing, and I was like, this is really bizarre. Yeah. And completely not appropriate in my opinion.
Was this new for the district at that point? Yes. This was like a brand new...
They were introducing it at this invite-only meeting. The other thing that I found was really shocking and I was really disturbed about, I was the only parent at this meeting. The only parent.
That's interesting.
So invite only, like I mentioned. I think it went out to the list of a few people who had been involved with this particular trustees meetings, which wasn't maybe only a handful of parents.
Right.
But it was clear that there wasn't a push to really let parents know what was going on. There was one other grandparent there, and she was the only other person in this meeting besides me that had children in the district. That wasn't a teacher.
Wow.
Yeah. And she was a retired teacher from the district. So I was literally the only parent in this meeting that had a student in the Clark County School District and was there just to listen and hear what was going on. So the other thing is I have a degree in psychology. And so I was flipping through this thing again. My phone had died. I had no service. I couldn't look anything up. I couldn't, so I was just kind of left to my own devices here, just my jaw on the floor. And I looked at the task force. I'm like, who's writing this guide? Curious.
Where's this coming from?
Yeah. And there was quite a few people on there who were from Planned Parenthood. And then the other big one was the University of Illinois. And I just happened to know because the Kinsey Institute, Alfred Kinsey is a well-known psychologist. He's considered a psychologist, but he's done a lot of really disgusting experiments on babies and children. And I mean, honestly, I don't know how much you'd want me to go into that. I mean, your audience could look it up, but Alfred Kinsey, John Money, all of these really highly sexualized, which I would actually call them like pedophiles, frankly, but they're still lauded and their research is still used as these, kind of like up and coming, and not up and coming, but like breakthrough scientists and use the institute at the University of Illinois. I just happened to know that. So I was like, okay, there's too much here for me. I mean, just in general, without even looking anything up that I know is wrong. And so they split us up into groups in that meeting, and we had to basically go through in our little groups, go through each of the topics under our category. We got a category. And I think ours was marriage and family, something like that. Of course, they wanted to talk about same-sex marriage extensively through that, and not just talk about it like this is a thing that happens, like glorifying it. There was a lot of interesting points that were like that sort of said like religion. Oftentimes the religion of the families causes a lot of dissonance, right? Because the kids think there's shame behind
because there's some moral connection.
Exactly. And I'm like, yes.
Yes. There is. Because you're welcome. Yes.
Yeah. Right and wrong is real.
There is a compass. Yes.
Exactly. And that's the thing that you could see really clear, that they wanted to completely erase all those lines. Like there is just there's nothing that's considered wrong. It's all about you personally, how you feel. And again, that value of consent.
So during this time, and this is when you kind of came into my scope, I was a first-year teacher, but it was 20 years after I'd gotten my teaching degree. Wow. I was just starting teaching, and I went as a first-year teacher. The principal puts out a list of different meetings they need liaisons for. And so I was like, she goes, we don't have this one filled. Can anyone do it? It fulfills one of your requisites to get your credits that you need to get your license. I was like, I'll do it. That's fine. I'll do whatever. So I go to the equity and diversity and inclusion meeting, and it's after, I've taught all day and I'm exhausted teaching first graders. And I go down to East Las Vegas and go into this room, and there's a whole department that I was completely unaware existed in our school district. And there was a liaison from every school in the district, and they sit us down and they start talking about equity, diversity, and include all the things. And I'm given this paper, and I'm supposed to match pronouns with what they mean. And I'm like, I teach first grade. Yeah. First of all, I'm trying to get people to like read and write. That is my job. And also, I don't have paper in my classroom, right? So like we're rationing paper, and I'm having to buy my own paper, and I make like $30,000 a year, and there's an entire department of people being paid to give me this form to write little lines about what a buy and try and whatever is. And after about 15 minutes, I felt really uncomfortable with the laughing, and this is so fun, and let's all talk about our experiences with these types of students and how important this is. And I just got up and I walked out. I was like, I am not doing this, right? Like, I'm not, I should have said something, hindsight, like, what are we doing? Yeah. But I didn't. I was just kind of awestruck and went back to my principal. I said, I can't do it. It's like, kind of goes against my moral grain or something. And she's like, okay, I'll appoint somebody else. I don't, like, they just have to do what they have to do, right? Yeah. And then you came onto the scene. Okay. And so that's kind of, everyone has their little perspective of the pie. So after this happens, you go to this meeting, you see like this weird research that they're using and how all this new curriculum. Yeah. What happens after that?
So I started asking questions. In fact, I called my trustee the next day, and I said, listen, I have some concerns I wanted to ask you. My biggest concern is, why are we using this organization to bring in this type of curriculum to our district from New York? And, I said, she's like, well, it's, it's one of the foremost ones out there. And I said, well, I do think that it feels really sort of political. Honestly, I said, when you have someone who's written a guide that's from Planned Parenthood, I think you're going to get a lot of pushback from parents. And then she just started screaming at me. And I've known this woman now for a little bit. I mean, I've been coming to the meetings. It's not like I didn't have a relationship with her. And she just like went in, and I was like, okay, something is bigger here. I've like completely struck a nerve. So I said, I just want to know when this is going to be implemented and how we can make sure more parents know about it. And she did not like that. She did not like that. So I can't remember who told me to do this, but I ended up calling curriculum and development, which is
through the district.
Yes, through the district. Ended up speaking to a woman who, I mean, she's still around, and she's actually with the Department of Education now, but called just naively, sort of asking some questions about our current sex education, how do I get material on what we have, why would someone think that there's gaps in our sex education? So I was just asking questions as a parent. And it became clear, I think, that she didn't want to answer all my questions, and that maybe she felt like I had an ulterior motive, which of course I did. My ulterior motive is like, how do we protect our kids from having this horrifying curriculum come into the district? And so then I was asking, why are we having these meetings that are invite only? It feels like the district is hiding things from the parents.
Right. Why wouldn't it just be an open forum?
Right. Like, let's let everybody know about it and just come and see what they want to teach and take, have a town hall or whatever. So then they were like, oh, you need to probably call this person. So everyone was just shuffling me around. I ended up getting in touch with another trustee who at the time, you probably remember her, Patrice too. And she actually called me on the phone, and she was like, hey, I heard you had some information. And, I'm just kind of like, what's going on? I'm talking to like these elected officials now. I'm just this like stay-at-home mom. And she was like, I didn't even know about this. So as a trustee, she didn't even know about this meeting. I didn't know about this organization being brought into the district. Wow. So that was really eye-opening. So that was actually a really nice kind of pivot point, because she knew more of what to do at that point. Like these are the people.
And she's like, I wasn't even like, she's got some questions probably at this point as well.
No, exactly. I'm showing her the guide because I now have a copy of it. So what happens is we start just calling people. I had called my friend who originally told me about the sex education thing in the district. She knew people more in kind of like the political space, so she was calling people. So we get this group of parents who's now kind of like, everyone's kind of like, wait, what's going on? And so I start making copies of this guide. I mean, it's like it's 100 plus pages. So it's a big document. This is pre sort of like a lot of the electronic stuff transmission. I mean, looking at 2013, 14. We start emailing it to the parents. And people started getting upset. And so what we ended up doing was we organized a bunch of parents to come to the next school board meeting and bring the guide that a lot of them had printed out that we sent, and just read portions of that at a school board meeting. And, in the meantime, I was emailing and calling the superintendent, and we were asking other parents to do that, like email the superintendent and ask why they're using this guide, ask why this is the company that they're bringing into the district, and then show up to the meeting. So we ended up bringing like 300 parents to the school board meeting. And this was the first time, remember, like I always say, we were sort of the domestic terrorists before it was cool. I don't know if your audience would remember that reference, but the Attorney General under Biden called a lot of the parents who had been going to school board meetings the domestic terrorists. It was in a memo and had issued an apology for that. But they were like following parents and watching their online activity. I mean, the FBI was involved, so it was just wild.
Insane.
Yeah, because parents didn't want this radical sex education being taught to their kids. So I would say we were the first in line to be the domestic terrorists. So, but we brought all these people there. They couldn't even fit them all in the building. In fact, there was capacity, so they had people standing outside.
What was the reaction of the trustees at that moment?
So obviously the trustee who was my trustee was extremely unhappy and was arguing to keep this guide, but every other trustee was
Why were they so dead set on doing that? Had there been a lot of money invested already? Like what was the purpose? Why did she care so much?
I have, to this day, I have never gotten the answer to that. Because I felt like before this situation happened, this particular trustee, I thought was doing a really good job. She was holding these meetings for parents. She was keeping people informed. She was helping explain the budget, things that a lot of.
But if I had 300 parents show up to a meeting and tell me they don't like what I'm doing, I'd say, oh, maybe I need to do something else.
Yeah, I need to pivot.
Did you have opposition on the other way?
Absolutely. So she dug in for sure. But then on the other side of things, we had a lot of outside organizations. So
what about parents?
Parents, for the most part, were
on
not
your
in
side?
favor of this. Yeah, They were on our side. The biggest thing we got in the beginning from parents was, you guys are being
nitpicky or
like you're just lying, or you're exaggerating this. They're of course they're not going to teach this to kids. So they just didn't believe it.
Yeah.
They just thought we were fear mongering, you know what I mean? So that was more of the pushback in the very beginning. But after that very first meeting where we brought these 300 parents, the superintendent actually pulled the guide. And he ended up calling my team. I'm saying my team, but it was me and like 5 other moms.
Yeah, my team, my tribe. Yeah.
It was really just the few of us who had gotten really involved in the beginning and decided to organize. But he called us in, and we had a meeting. And so anyway, he issued an apology to parents, and it was on the news and it was printed in the paper. I mean, it was a big deal. So we were like, yes. I mean, we're so empowered,
Yes,
like,
we made a difference. We've impacted. We can go home now.
Right.
Yes, we're done.
That's off my back. Yeah. But we realized that, unfortunately, because of my research, now looking at this guide, looking at this organization, going down that rabbit hole, unfortunately, what I found was really disturbing. And it was very well funded by outside organizations who it wasn't about sex education. It was about social engineering. That was 100% the goal of these groups. And Planned Parenthood was one of them. SIECUS was a subsidiary of SIECUS, was actually, so Margaret Sanger, who was the founder of Planned Parenthood, had been the president of SIECUS at one point in time. I found some information about Hugh Hefner being, in 1969, giving up a huge amount of money, of his own personal money, to start sex education programs in the public school system. So think about that, why he would want that, of course.
Yeah.
So as I began to do the research, right? I mean, it was just, and people didn't believe me. They're like, no. I'm like, it's all there. You can go and find it yourself. This is actually just factual information. But unfortunately, I just began to know too much. And it was like, why are these groups trying so hard to create customers? Of our kids.
Yes.
And they are grooming them. That was just pure and simple. They were being groomed.
So that was the first step. What was over the next few years? Take us forward a little bit. You keep going with this because now you know too much. You've seen all of this stuff. You're seeing these groups. You're seeing this opposition growing. Yeah. What was kind of the next big thing?
So we filed officially as a 501c4,
which is really hard.
Very hard. And we didn't know, we didn't know what we were doing. I mean, I have a degree in psychology and political science. Like I had no nonprofit experience at all. It's a completely different
Why
role.
did you feel that was important?
So we ended up filing as a C4, which allows you to do more advocacy, like lobbying and activism. And because that's really what we were doing, as we were like engaging elected officials, being involved with like lawmaking and policy, because what started to happen was when we stopped that and brought such a huge spotlight on it in the district, a lot of people had started to talk, oh, we need to change state law. So these parents can't bully us and push back and stop us from this agenda. So then we had to start learning what it meant to be a lobbyist. And then there was other issues. We realized like the big overarching issue was parental rights. So that was kind of the recognition is
like, I don't want my kid to see this or do this. I want to opt out of this.
Exactly.
Right.
And you should have the right to do that. And we realized at the time that almost every single state in the country at that point, other than I think there's only 5 at the time that had not changed their laws to an it's a opt-in system. So we were the 5 that still had opt-out. So we always say, I'm saying it incorrectly. I'm like getting it reversed.
I get them backwards.
So opting in is when you give express permission for your child to learn.
Right. You get the permission slip and you sign it. Yes, they can do this.
Yes. And so you've
opting
opted
in.
That. We say opting in keeps parents in, right? So it keeps them in the loop because I mean, you have a lot of kids. I have a lot of kids. You lose things in the backpack. It doesn't make it home. So if you have an opt-out system, then they can send the form home, say that they've informed the family. If you don't see it and say, I'm going to opt my child out, expressly opt them out, then they'll teach it to them. Regardless.
Right. It's like having a field trip. You didn't send in the forms, so they take them anyway.
Exactly.
Right.
Which of course, I mean, that's a great example because they wouldn't do that.
They would never do that. They won't give your child an aspirin.
Not at all. Absolutely not. So we just were saying like parents have to be able to give express consent before their child learns it. And we should be able to view the curriculum so that we can decide if it's something we want our kids to learn. And that was a big sticking point because they're like, well, there's copyright. We weren't even allowed to see as parents that they were showing our kids at school and they were teaching our kids at school. So we recognized this issue of parental rights. We had to just empower parents to advocate for their kids because it took this large group of parents to come show up and say, no, we're not okay with this. We had to have a big showing.
Well, and I feel like with groups of people like this, it's like herding cats. Like we all have the same, but I don't agree with you on this, but I agree with you on this. And you're, trying to like round up a big group of people that all have the same interest. That can be difficult. And you definitely need like some leadership. What are some other things that were big parental rights issues, especially in this state?
Yeah, that's a good question.
But nationally too.
Yeah, so the opt-in for sex education was a big one. One big issue we dealt with was parental notification for abortion.
Tell me a little bit about that.
This is such a tough one because in Nevada, we had a parental notification law on the books from like 1980 something, and it got immediately after it was passed, it was enjoined. So essentially, it was not allowed to be enforced because the Democrats sued. And so that's how that happened. And so that law was never able to be enforced. Well, so this was, I think 2015-ish, this was coming back up as we were trying to get parental notification for abortion passed, working with other groups like Nevada Right to Life and some other groups, and just recognizing that parents should absolutely be informed if their daughter is going to be having a medical procedure, regardless of the medical procedure.
And who could take them? They could take themselves?
They could take themselves.
A teacher?
Anybody can take them. There's no boundaries around who, like, if you are a girl and you are able to get pregnant, you are able to obtain an abortion in Nevada without your parents being told.
Is that still the case?
That's still the case, unfortunately. And so parental notification, by the way, a lot of people don't realize is a lower burden than parental consent. So what we were pushing for was only parental notification. So at least you as a parent say, okay,
she's still going to do it, but this is what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you have an opportunity to take her to counseling, or if you don't want her to do it or something, talk some sense into her. I mean, but you could have a 12-year-old that's being taken by your neighbor, and basically what we argued and have continued to argue is if a child is pregnant, 12, between, let's say 12 and 16 or 11 and 16, something like that, because 16 is the age of consent in Nevada for sex, but they can't consent under that. A crime has been committed if they are pregnant. So all these laws do is they cover up a crime. They protect the perpetrator.
They enable. And that's the thing. People like to put this on right and left, and it's like, why is this a political issue? It should just be a moral.
Absolutely.
As a parent, you have the say over you manage your children.
Yes. And unfortunately, this is what happens in this space is that you get, these parental rights issues are very common sense. Majority of parents believe in them and believe that should be, the right of the parent. But then you get into this space where there's all this millions and billions of dollars being funneled in by outside organizations like Planned Parenthood and other groups in that same space, ACLU, all these organizations, left-leaning, that want to stop those laws because they want these children to be able to make these decisions. It's very bizarre. And then the parents lose, and so it's a lot of like messaging and a lot of just funding that to change the laws because they have more expensive lobbyists they can pay them more, honestly. And that's what we were up against. I mean, this is really like a David and Goliath situation where we were just like these parents who were like, no, we know this is right. And we know this is, what we're saying is right. What these people are doing is wrong and we need to, fix it. And we're going up against this giant that has been doing it and is so well funded. So that parental notification, just there's so much legally about that. But after Roe v. Wade was actually, the decision came down from the Supreme Court
and
that
put
it was
back to the states.
Yeah, went back to the states, and that actually allowed that enjoined law that had been on the books to be enforced essentially in Nevada. But of course, right away, there was a lawsuit brought by these organizations, these left-leaning organizations. So it had never been enforced. And then there was just a ruling that came from the Nevada Supreme Court that essentially ruled in favor of having no parental notification.
Wow.
And so there's a question on the ballot. Oh my gosh, I believe it's question 6. I want to make sure I have that correct before I leave here. But this is going to be going on the ballot, which essentially is going to enshrine abortion rights, is what they call them, in our Constitution. What people don't realize is we already have the right to abortion in Nevada up to 29 weeks. And then beyond that, if there's the life and health of the mother, which is just can be anything, basically. So you can have already an abortion up to birth here in Nevada without parental consent, regardless of your age. I mean, really not even informed consent, because there's so many things they're not even requiring these ladies to know or to say when they go in. And so all this does is enshrine it in the Constitution so that it can never be changed in the law. Like we can never decide to change anything. And so including having no parental consent or parental notification. So it's really, really bad. I mean, I know people think like, oh, we don't want to lose our right to abortion. I know there's people out there that feel like, well, that's
not what this is.
No, it's not. We have the right. In fact,
Yes.
this doesn't change that right. And so even if you're pro-abortion, this is bad. I mean, I almost always tell people when there's a ballot initiative that changes the Constitution, you rarely want to change the Constitution, because it's very, very hard to undo.
Yes.
If you ever find out new information.
I always vote no on all. I usually just go down and just say, no, I don't want any, changes.
Yeah, exactly.
So there was a meeting I went to. I was standing on a corner of Sahara and Lindell, somewhere over there, and I think it was during COVID.
Yeah.
And was it mask mandate?
Yeah, we were talking about the mask.
Okay.
And getting kids back into the
classroom, which is, as a teacher, oh my gosh, I'm seeing these kids who can't do anything. Yeah. I am like blown away. Yeah. As a substitute teacher, I walk in, I'm like, oh my gosh, this destroyed these kids. You unionized.
Yeah.
And that I got a T-shirt. I paid $20 and I got the shirt. What did that mean? For people?
So, I mean, we obviously couldn't like officially unionize because, but what we were really trying to accomplish was we recognized that there was such an outsized influence of the teachers' unions. And it was keeping our kids, first of all, locked in their rooms essentially over COVID. It was hurting these kids. It was the main obstacle to getting our kids back into classrooms was the teachers' unions. And I saw it with my own eyes. I saw it firsthand. They fought tooth and nail to keep our kids out of the classroom. It was unbelievable to see. I mean, we had done a Freedom of Information Act request, a FOIA, from the county coroner's office, because we knew there were so many kids that had been like hurting themselves, killing themselves because of the anxiety and depression and isolation. And we were saying this at meetings, like, you have to let these kids back in schools. Like, they have no sports, they have nothing to look forward to. They're losing hope. These kids are literally dying. And we were being told that we are fearmongers once again. So I did a FOIA request and I poured over like 21 of these names of kids who had, within like that year, who had killed themselves and had, died by their own hand. And I was going through like matching them up with the Facebook pages of the parents just to verify that they were Clark County School District students, and just reading these devastating posts from parents who had lost their child to suicide. And I mean, I probably have PTSD from this, honestly. It was just a horrible thing that we had to do, but even bringing that to the district at a meeting and talking to trustees, we were told by, like Linda Cavazos and other trustees that we were lying, and that we were manipulating parents that to try to emotionally manipulate people into getting kids, and so that teachers would get sick, and because we didn't care about teachers. Yeah, it's just crazy stuff. So that situation was really hard, but that we had a couple of different protests, we called them. And we realized like we needed a parent union to go up against the teachers union, because frankly, there's more parents. There's more parents. But we're just not as well funded. And that's been the biggest issue.
We're more spirit than money, right? Yes. Right. We have more heart.
Well, the thing is, I mean, if you know anything about teachers unions, it's such a conflict of interest, because they take money from these teachers and they put them into these political races, into in these people who will end up getting elected into the legislature, who can then turn around and help give more money to teacher salaries. And that's what happens every session. And so they're getting these people elected. They're using the teachers' money, which is essentially, it's a public service, right? They're being paid through our tax dollars. So our tax dollars are going into these political, PACs to get these people elected who will continue to support what the teachers want. And they do not have the kids' interest in mind. They have the teacher's interest in mind.
Right.
And unfortunately, my mom's just retired from teaching from the district. Like, there's a million great teachers out there. And the good ones wanted to be back in the classroom. And so that's the thing that's frustrating. It's like what the teachers union is doing is saying, we hate teachers and we don't support teachers. And really the majority of the teachers were actually on our side.
Because they're parents too, usually.
Parents. And they see the damage that's doing these kids.
Yes. And I remember, again, as a first-year teacher, going to those onboarding things with the district, and the union members would walk around your tables and you're supposed to fill out this form. And I didn't know anything about this. And I was like, you're going to take money from me every month or whatever. I'm only making like 30 grand a year, first of all. And they're like, well, don't you want our attorneys? And I'm like, well, what are they going to take, my 30 grand a year? Like, I don't even have anything, know, but it felt like bullying.
It is.
And I just was like, I don't want to do that, but it was a high pressure situation. It wasn't like, fill it out if you want, no big deal. It wasn't that.
No.
Let's move forward a little bit. Just for the consideration of time, tell me where Planned Parenthood is today.
Planned Parenthood? Or Power to Parent?
Power to Parent. You can tell me where Planned Parenthood as well.
We can talk about that too. Okay, so I will, fast forward. That's a really good, because we dealt with another big issue with the gender diverse policy. We can get into that.
I've been to those meetings along the way. Big win for sports, right?
Huge,
recently.
Huge. And,
yesterday or the day before?
Yeah, it was yesterday. And then also in the previous school year, our organization was a part of helping change the policy for the NIAA for Nevada, that initially said, no, we aren't going to necessarily allow these transgender students to compete. So there's still some wishy-washiness in there, but this Supreme Court decision was a massive win. So that's been a big thing we've been involved with, just protecting kids in the school and safety. But so fast forward, we realized, we were really playing whack-a-mole with all these issues. We didn't have the funding to go up against a lot of these like very, very well-organized groups. And a lot of us, again, were parents. We'd go to these meetings and, we're taking time away from the soccer games and not making dinner for our kids and trying to figure out childcare so we can go to like 3, 4,
and
5 hour
paying for copies of things and paying for all the stuff that goes along with it.
Everything. Yeah. We were losing money, like we were we're doing this because we wanted to protect our kids and because it was right. But we'd go to these meetings and we'd have activists there that were essentially, we found out, were being paid by some of these organizations to be there, and didn't have kids, and frankly hated kids, hated families. It was just really, really devastating feeling all the time. Just felt very dark. So we were like, we need to be more proactive. How do we be more proactive and fundraise in a way that can help us sustain and grow the organization? And so we actually transitioned to a 501c3. So we have both still, because we still are involved politically on some things on our action side. But our 501c3 is where we have operated for the longest from. And we began to build programs that were, parent advocacy is a program that we have where if a parent has an issue with their child's school, we try to help walk through the channels with them, help them get the help they need, find,
I like
and then
that.
we'll step in sometimes and do face-to-face advocacy if we need to. But, one of our other big programs that we recently started, well, it's been about 2 years, is our Fatherhood Project. And so we have a Fatherhood Project program that's a peer-to-peer support program for dads. And it's a 10-week program. It was actually developed at Mass General Hospital, it was Harvard Medical School. And so it wasn't something that we developed ourselves. And so we purchased this program. And now we partner with a lot of different groups in the community, like Hope for Prisoners and Vegas Stronger, Foster Kinship. We have a few other partners, and then we're continuing to grow and get, funding for that program, because this is a way for us to empower parents, right? Empower these parents to be the parents that they're supposed to be. When you have empowered parents, especially dads, and the data on intact families, but specifically involved fathers, whether they're in the home or not, is unbelievable. It's so undeniable how important fathers are. We have this huge fatherlessness problem in our country, and especially in certain communities, and we see that in the violence, in the truancy problems, kids not graduating from high school, all these different issues. And so if we want people who can protect their kids, we want empowered parents. This is a way that we felt like was a proactive way to do that. And so that was one of our programs we started. Another issue, especially out of the COVID situation, we really started to champion school choice, because we feel like this idea of education freedom is, if your school isn't working for your kid and they're not learning, they should be able to move to a school and a classroom that works for them.
Right.
And that was, that's something in Nevada that's been really, really sparse. And so since COVID, the charter schools have grown considerably.
Hugely.
Homeschools have, the percentage of homeschoolers has grown.
What's that doing to the district? I know that the district's freaking out, kind of. They're closing schools. They're, we always need teachers, and all of a sudden they're surplusing teachers. What is it causing them to scramble a bit?
Yeah.
Like, what does that look like?
And, it's interesting, because we've been telling the district for years, like, you have to make sure that you're listening to these parents, and because these parents that you're not listening to are leaving the district. They're going to leave. And frankly, it became part of our mission in COVID, is that if you guys aren't going to actually help kids, we're going to help families leave this district. And since that 2020 timeframe, the district's lost 20% of their enrollment, which is massive, because we're talking about per pupil funding. So every kid is a dollar sign for them. So it is, you already said, they're having to close schools, which is, even 20 years ago, we couldn't build schools fast enough here.
Right.
That's been the biggest issue, is because of the growth of the city, and we couldn't even build, overcrowding and all this. And now they're having to close schools and consolidate some of these schools because they don't have the funding and they don't have the enrollment. And so, I hate to say it, because we've utilized public school,
Of course.
my family has, and we've utilized all of the options out there, but public school was a big part of that for my family. And we had a great public school, but part of that was because you had involved parents at that school who were on campus or volunteering. And I know that isn't happening at every school. And unfortunately, like that, we know the number one indicator for success in school for kids is parent engagement, is that parent involvement. And so again, back to the kind of proactive program side, that is a big part of what we're doing, is empowering parents to advocate for their kids, but being involved, how do you be involved? Like, how do you know your child's teacher? We try to give parents those types of information. What kind of things do you ask at a conference, and these other, things that you should know as a parent. So
being in the classroom, one thing I've really noticed a big change since COVID is Chromebooks. We're on them all the time.
Yeah.
And I give them some grace, because I'm a substitute. So they might say, today you're just going to do this because, the teacher was sick or whatever. Yeah. But I'm like, these little ones are not writing, like they're not holding small manipulatives. We're not doing rug time. I don't see some of those old school principles and like ways that we used to do things. Yeah. If I got hired today, I'd still do rug time in first grade and kindergarten, like Absolutely. Definitely doing that, doing small manipulative things. And I'm just really seeing so much, and I'm hoping that trend turns around with the Chromebooks. There was such a push to get them in the schools. Yes. And now I'm like, it's just everything is on the Chromebook.
No,
and I'm like,
it's actually devastating. And there's a great author, John Altman. He wrote a book called The Anxious Generation. And you can see the data that we have now, that just our kids are actually, they're getting worse. They're learning less, they're retaining less. And this is the first time in history where we haven't seen growth. And it starts, you can see, like around 2010, and it corresponds to when kids have one-to-one technology in the classroom. It's actually one of the things that I have been reading and thinking about so much recently, because it's like, how do we go backwards
Yeah.
We've given these kids, every kid has a device. And there was a point in time where I had told my kids, teachers, like, hey, my kids aren't going to bring Chromebooks home. They have to stay at school, like, because they're coming home every day in the backpack. And then the kids, they're like, oh yeah, we monitor these things. Absolutely. My kids are learning things on YouTube, watching things that I absolutely would never allow them to watch at home. And I had no control over it. Like, you can't put parental controls on these devices because they're monitored by the school. So there's so many huge problems with devices.
But like doing a math problem on a computer is much different than doing it with like beans.
Right.
You need those connections. And I don't know the words, but I just know that's the truth. And it's like they're not making those like writing connections and like counting and just those really like I just want education to go back to teach them to read and write.
Yeah.
That's all I need.
Yeah.
And the rest of it we'll figure out.
Absolutely.
Because that's how, it's been forever.
Absolutely.
So you have, as grassroots, stay-at-home mom, you figured out a way to impact your community in a huge way.
Thank you.
Like you're a big deal. Like a huge deal. And I appreciate the work you've done because sometimes I'm just like, you know what? I'm so glad she's doing it because it's exhausting. Yeah. And I know you're exhausted from it, but I'm so grateful for you.
Thank you.
How do you feel about the impact you've made?
Yeah.
And what would you say to parents, especially women, to encourage them? I see some of these teachers, I see some families, moms working 2-3 jobs and just trying to get by. How can you stay involved and how can you impact your community if you have very little time and just really not a lot of energy?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think connecting with an organization like Power2Parent is a great way to do that because, obviously I'm not doing this on my own. I have an incredible team now. It's a little over 10 years. I mean, we really celebrated our official 10-year anniversary this year, 2026. And, that's a big milestone for us. And we have all these proactive programs now. Like, I didn't even talk about our Patriot Camp, our Constitution Bowl. We have a scholarship for families that can access some funds for private school for low-income families. So we have a lot of resources that we have over a decade have developed and grown and found sources of income and revenue to try to help pay for those things. So those are the families actually that we serve mainly, is these families who are, again, just trying to like raise their kids and do their best. And like you said, working all these jobs and maybe this school is not working for their child and they don't know what to do. We have been able to talk about what is school choice look like for every family. What are your options if this isn't working for you and you can't afford to send your kids to a private school or whatever, So I think connecting with Power2Parent is a really great way to do that.
Is it national? Are there other groups in other states?
So this is a hard question for us because we started it and then over COVID, we had all these outside states coming in and saying, we want to start Power2Parent. So we actually, there was a time where we had, I think, 5 different states had chapters of Power2Parent.
Oh.
And the only one that still exists right now that it's really operating is Utah. And Utah started a group called Utah Parents United. And then it was actually a gal who had been on our board here, moved to Utah.
And she started
it there. And she wanted to call it Power2Parent, but we were just in this space where we were like, we don't really have the infrastructure to stand up other chapters right now at this point. And then when we tried to do it, didn't really go well just because this work is really difficult because every state's laws are really different. Every state's, needs are really unique.
Right.
And so, what we're doing here, you have to be really passionate about it and be able to, none of us took a paycheck for the first 7 years of running basically a full-time job. And, we wouldn't have done that if it wasn't just because we wanted to.
You cared.
Right. Help the kids in the city and obviously our own kids. So, that being said, Utah Parents United is still very active and we do a lot with them. There's an organization called the Parental Rights Foundation that we're affiliated with now. And then we have another affiliation with a school, it's called School Boards for Academic Excellence, which is a great organization that helps kind of give resources and train and identify candidates for school boards. So we have affiliations with other organizations that are doing work, but we, as at Power2Parent, we are Nevada based.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is a really good kind of a call to action or just a reminder that we can all do something where we are. Yeah. We can do something. Yeah. I can follow you on Facebook and get information. Yeah. That's the biggest thing is just getting the information and thinking about who's saying it, what they're saying, why they're doing it, and finding the truth.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. So I don't have to do everything. And I really appreciate that you've taken this on. And as a parent of a lot of kids and as an educator as well, it's definitely impacted our community.
Thank you.
I have one last question for you. What do you want your legacy to be?
Wow, that's a really big question. I think my legacy, I hope, is that I advocated for my kids. That my kids would know that was why I did everything that I did, was to protect them and empower them and give them the best opportunity. And in doing that, I was able to help a lot of other families as well.
Yes, every child in this city has definitely been impacted, and that is a legacy you will leave.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erin, for coming on today. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.